Gardening is an activity with a few different phases. It starts with planting, then there's actually raising and growing up the crops, the maintenance part, the weeding, the fertilizing, the watering. Then there's harvest, and then along with harvest, there's of course enjoying the fruits of your labor, but also storage. Storage of the crop so that you can enjoy it over the winter season and enjoy the fruits of your labor from your garden, even in the off season. And so that's what this video is actually going to be about, because a lot of the labor for gardening is actually not in the garden. And so I'm going to just give a little bit of insight on that in this video. So we're going to head on inside into the kitchen and do some work preparing some green beans for storage. There are actually a couple different ways that you can store green beans. One, of course, is canning, and the other is freezing. Now, for us, the stuff that we store, we just freeze things. We haven't gotten into any canning thus far. Not sure we're really planning on getting into any canning, but we definitely freeze things. And a big thing with freezing things is making sure to blanch them first. And so that's what we're going to do this evening. We're going to actually blanch some green beans and get them in the freezer. Here's today's harvest. It's not a huge harvest, but it's decent size. I already ate some of these beans for dinner this evening, so this is what's left after that. This is coming from our second wave of beans. So earlier, when we were getting the first wave or the first harvest, this bowl could be brim full with beans every day. Whereas this here, this is actually 2 days worth of beans that are harvested. I have two varieties planted, so you can clearly see we've got some yellow ones on top, and then there's green ones underneath. So that's what we're going to be blanching and freezing today. So to blanch green beans, there are a few things that we need. So number one, notice I have a cookie sheet, and this has got parchment paper lining that cookie sheet. So that's what I'm going to actually spread the green beans on to freeze, and you'll see that in a bit. We also need the steamer, which will go in this pot here. And then I've got this strainer. We've got a knife and cutting board, and the other thing that I'm not showing here is I'm going to have a bigger mixing bowl, and I'm also going to use salad tongs, and you'll see where those come into play in a bit. But this is our basic equipment here. So let's go ahead and get rolling. First step is going to be to wash those beans. So just washing these up. I usually just start with the sprayer, kind of fill the bowl up. And then once that's full, I'll slosh them around in the bowl, rinse them, and then I'll set them on the cutting board beside me. The washing is complete. It's now time to start cutting up the beans. So here's a bean here, and what you want to do is you cut off the ends, and then I cut them into pieces that are 1 inch to 1.5 inches long like this, and I throw them into the strainer there for holding temporarily. So go ahead and cut these, toss them in the strainer. Sometimes I'll grab 2, even 3 beans or more at a time, kind of line up the ends to try and speed things up. Now that all the green beans are cut up, we'll go ahead and prepare the pot with the water for steaming them. So when I fill this, I like to fill it up so that the water is just at the base of this steamer, or just coming up through. So you can kind of see as I slosh it, there's just a little bit coming up through. And so that's the water level that I like to use. Set the pot at the stove here. We're gonna go ahead and turn it on to high heat. Let that boil and start steaming, and then once it's boiling and steaming, we'll go ahead and dump in the beans. So now that I've got that heating up on the stove, I've got this other large mixing bowl here that I'm going to fill up with ice. So the ice, because what we need to do with blanching is you're going to heat things up in order to deactivate an enzyme in the vegetables so that they don't spoil. Even in the freezer they can spoil because of this enzyme. And the idea with cooling it down is you stop the cooking rapidly. And so that's going to be done via cold water in this case. So now that I've got ice in this bowl, I'll take it to the sink and fill it up. I'm now filling the bowl with water. I'm not going to fill it brim full, but I will put enough in there so that I can submerge that steamer in the ice water. So what will happen is I'll steam the green beans, I'll take the steamer out, and then I'll submerge it in the ice water to cool the beans down and stop the cooking. We're now starting to boil here in the pot on the stove, so I'm going to go ahead and drop those beans in. Then I'm going to set a timer here, 3 minutes. All right, it's now been 3 minutes. I've got my tongs here. I'm gonna turn the stove off, open this up. I'm gonna reach in, grab the steamer by the little center lift ring, and then I'm gonna dump the whole steamer with the beans in it in the ice water here. And I'm just actually gonna let that sit there for a minute. And part of the beauty of picking up the whole steamer is that it makes the next step really easy. So we're gonna let that sit and cool down for a minute, get nice and cool. Then we'll pick the steamer back up. I'll dump the water out of the bowl and then set the steamer down in the bowl so that it doesn't drip everywhere, and we'll be ready for the next step. So there is the steamer with the green beans sitting in the ice water bath to cool down. The beans have now cooled down, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift this up, kind of shake out the water. I'm going to dump the remaining ice water into the sink, and then I take the steamer with the beans and I set it right back into the bowl, and I'm ready to go and spread these out on the cookie sheet. So once I have the water drained, I just take the beans and I'm going to spread them out on the cookie sheet on the parchment paper. The goal is to kind of have one kind of flat layer where they're all spread out and not touching each other. And what we're going to do from here, once we get these spread out, so we're going to get them dried a little bit, and then they're actually going to freeze right here. And that's the whole reason that we don't really want them touching each other, because we don't want them freezing together and creating kind of big clumps. This way, if they're all separate, they'll freeze separate and be loose in the bag instead of making kind of an ice block in the bag once we get them into the bag. So we get them spread out, and once they're spread like this, I'm just going to grab a little piece of paper towel. And I like to try and just help absorb a little bit more of the moisture with the paper towel. I'll kind of do it on one side for half the sheet and then flip it. Just kind of tamp it on there. I'm just trying to absorb a little bit of the excess surface moisture from the beans. Again, so that they're not going to freeze together and not get frost on the outside. So now that those are dried off, what I'll do is I'll let this sit for about another 3 to 5 minutes to just dry a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and stick this tray in the freezer. So a few minutes have passed. We're gonna go ahead and put these into the freezer. So I'm gonna open the freezer now and we're gonna swing this around and we're gonna slide it kind of right in there on top. And we're gonna let those freeze for a half hour and then they'll be ready to put into a bag. It has been a half an hour. The beans here are now frozen. I'm just gonna kind of scrape them up a little bit with my fingers. That's where the parchment paper is really handy, and again, keeping them separated, you can see I've got a nice loose pile of these beans. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up the remainder of this bag. So this bag is in process. It's been in process since August 9th, which it's now August 27th, so that's pretty impressive. We just haven't had that many green beans between harvest points here. We'll see, I might be able to get all of these in here. If not, I have another bag ready. And again, what I like to do is I just write the date when I start putting beans into the bag. So, looks like we can get all these in here. So this bag is actually now full. I'll leave a little gap there. And what I'll do is I'll suck the air out. And now it's kind of nice and tight there. And so that's now ready to sit in the freezer. So just to sum up this process, first step is to wash the beans, then cut off the ends and cut them into the size pieces that you want. I then put them on the stove. I steam them for 3 minutes. Once that 3-minute ends, I promptly remove the steamer, put it in ice water to cool things down. Then remove the steamer from the ice water bath, spread the green beans out in a thin layer on a cookie sheet, dry them off, then set that in the freezer for a half hour to an hour, maybe a couple hours. Sometimes I've even left it overnight before. But they really just need to freeze up enough to be solid. Then pull that out of the freezer, scrape the beans up, and then place them in a freezer bag. And that's all there is to it in terms of blanching and freezing green beans.